Hey there, fellow citizens of the internet. Welcome to the Moses Kabandana Podcast. Today I have with me Tom Conlon. And Tom, welcome to the Moses Kabandana Podcast.
Hey, Moses. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, sir. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. But the overarching theme here is going to be how do those things apply to someone that is, let's say, 17, maybe all the way to like 25 or 40, but they're trying to embark on a new journey that requires some adapting of responsibility. So can you just give us a short background of who you are and what you do, and
Sure.
maybe even like a small synopsis of what the next 5 years look like for you?
Synopsis of the next 5 years. Okay. So,
Yeah.
hey, I'm Tom Conlon. I own a creative agency called North Street. So when I say creative agency, there's lots of different types of creative agencies out there or creative marketing agencies. So what we specifically do is creative strategy and execution. So branding is a big part of what we do. And so branding is, create company names, create their sort of mission statement and the way that they speak to audiences, the way they look and feel, right? Their logo, their typography, their colors, and all of that. And then we do a lot of website design and development. And then in the case of nonprofits, we'll actually do a lot of sort of annual reports or capital campaigns. So the types of clients that we work with are typically business clients. So we don't like sell soda or bubble gum or things like that. We work with financial services agencies, sort of like law firms, nonprofits, and healthcare organizations, right? So it's businesses serving other businesses, or businesses with like not tangible consumer products. It's usually services or something a little more kind of abstract or esoteric.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, I started the agency 13 years ago. I was a designer and developer myself, building websites, building visual identities. And I got really busy and I decided I'm either going to stay a freelancer, and that's fine. There's a lot of people. This was before the gig economy and all of that, but I could still make a living as a freelance person, right? Just handling clients myself, doing everything. Or I had an opportunity to sort of think a little bit larger than myself. And it's like, all right, do I want to build something here, something bigger than myself, right? So I can take on projects that are bigger than me or beyond my own abilities. And that's what I decided to do. I didn't really do it on purpose with a business plan, but I just sort of started hiring freelancers. And now 13 years later, we're a company of 10. We've got people all over the planet. So it's been interesting. So that's my background.
Okay. And what does the next 5 years kind of look like?
Right? Next 5 years. Wow, that's a good question. So with the pandemic, so much has changed that I'm sure you're hearing that from all of your guests, but the fact that we've got, before the pandemic, there was 7 of us. We're now 10 or 11. But there were 7 of us all in one room in New York City, right? We were all going to work every day in the office. Yep. And now in 2023, I've got employees all over the country. I've got them in Latin America. I've even got someone in Madagascar and Africa. So we've expanded geographically beyond where I ever thought was possible 5 years ago. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, you're going to have employees in Latin America and Madagascar, I would have said you're crazy.
No way.
So when I think about the next 5 years, for my business, I'm really focused on expanding. I'm really focused on operations, and what that means is really building the most efficient company I possibly can. Doing great work, of course, and having amazing culture. But really, I want the next 5 years to be about efficiency and profitability, because at the end of the day, this company needs to be it needs to produce enough revenue to take care of all of our employees, and thrive and continue to be vital. So I'd say the next 5 years, are really just going to be focused on building smartly.
Okay. And so, well, this is going to sound like a bit trivial, but why focus on efficiency?
Because I think it's a good question. And I think that, if I had to start an agency, when I started my agency, this is the way you start it. This is the way a lot of freelancers go from freelancing to creating a business is that they're the practitioner, right? They're the expert practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
meaning I was the designer, I was the developer. I loved doing websites, I loved doing logos, so why not start a business
Mm.
doing that? What you realize a few years in is two things. One, you have to sell your services, right? I think that's a
Mm.
big piece that people don't realize when they go and start their own business. They're like, oh, I love being a web designer and developer, so I'll just do this as a company.
Yeah.
The thing is that you also have to be constantly thinking about where the work's going to come from, right? So
Right.
a lot
Right.
of freelancers start a business because they've just got clients or they've got people sending them work, but at a certain point those projects are going to end and you're going to
Mm.
need the next project to work on. So it's like, where did you get that project? So that's sales marketing, right?
Yep.
But then the other important piece is once you get the work, how do you do it in a way that is cost effective, is really good quality, and gives the client a customer experience that they'll come back for, right? Like they just
Mm.
love
Mm.
working with you.
Yeah.
And I think that and in order to do those three things, I think you really need to have your operations down, which is operations is just a fancy word for processes and accountability, right? It's just
Yeah.
like, make sure that when we say that this is like, we're going to design a website, this is how we do it. This is when you can expect to have meetings with us. This is who's going to work on it. This is when they're going to work on it. This is how long it's going to take. And then on the back end for us, we're like, okay, well, we know what we're paying our employees. We know what we're paying for the rest of our overhead, our rent, our computers, our software, et cetera. And then
Yeah.
we know what we need to make in order to make a profit. And that's all to me is if you're running a business without efficiencies, if you're not focused on efficiencies, two things are going to happen. One is you're just not going to have processes. You're going to be unpredictable.
Mm.
Clients
Mm.
don't want unpredictable, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to hope it's going to get done or hope it's going to get done on time, but also you're just going to get the cost of doing business rises every year, right? Like
Yep.
there's inflation. Your employees should be getting, regular raises, hopefully. And things get more expensive, right? Like rent gets more expensive, software gets more expensive, your employees' lives get more expensive. And so if you're not
Mm.
always working on efficiencies, the cost of doing business the way you do it is only going to get more expensive. And if you're not getting more efficient, then you're going to hit a breaking point where suddenly you're losing money
Right.
to be
Right.
to be in business, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. And so, well, you mentioned how COVID changed a lot of things. What would you say someone that is trying to start a business in this post-COVID era, like what are some of the obstacles that they would face that were not necessarily there pre-COVID?
Yeah, the big one I think is building a network. It's harder
Mm.
to do now. So building a network
Okay.
is, what do I mean by that? I mean, the word networking, which is can be a dirty word, but can also just be essential to running a business. And by
Yeah.
networking, I'll just say, simply that's going out and meeting people that you hope to get business from or that you hope that you can provide some kind of help to, right? It's always a
Yeah.
two-way street. Like networking is, you network because it's like, oh yeah, I went to that college and I know whoever, or yeah, I have a friend in that doctor's office and whatever, but then you're also hoping that these people think of you in the future when they need a website or a brand or whatever it is that you do.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, this was very easy to do. There was no shortage of in-person events I could go to and just meet a bunch of new people, and then you follow up with them and you have coffee. And when you follow up with someone and have coffee with them, you're in person. It's very intimate. It's one-on-one. You can't go anywhere. You have to really invest your time to like listen and get to know this person. I
Mm.
found that in COVID, it's a lot harder to do. There aren't, or post COVID, it's just a lot of stuff has gone online. Even
Right.
though we're post COVID, technically, there's a lot more just happens online. So I think it's harder for someone to just find these groups and crack into them in a way that's it's like, what's the equivalent of walking into a room and meeting a bunch of new people and just sort of having casual conversations? It's a little different now. It's like it's much more appointment. It's like okay, let's meet at 10:30 over
Right.
Zoom, and
Yeah.
then we'll sort of but I'm meeting 100 people over Zoom a day. And so it's just so different than sitting down with someone in a coffee shop and really just talking. So I'd say that's the hardest part, I think, is
Mm.
the networking. Now I can go and tell you 1,000 things that are easier, but that's a totally different conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I mean, it's well, like the reason that I'm asking is that it seems as though, well, it doesn't seem, it is true that the internet is providing a medium through which a lot of people can make money. They can thrive.
Mm-hmm.
They can start businesses. But then there's an increase in, at the very least, the perception that the online gig economy is oversaturated. So if I'm trying to start a business of sorts that involves, well, that lives online, right? That's not a brick and mortar. There's the conceptual understanding that, okay, this space is saturated. What do you have to say to that? Is there any palpable truth to that?
We're talking about branding then, Moses, which is perfect because
Right.
that's what we do. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it is oversaturated. Everything's oversaturated. I mean, there's a million firms that do what I do. There's a million people that have podcasts like you, right?
Yeah.
So really, it's all about making your brand, whether that's your personal brand or your company brand, stand out. And so really, at the heart of branding, and I think I said this earlier, but like the heart of branding is really the science of making really, really good impressions with the right audience, right? And so like
Okay.
what I do isn't for everybody. Like I said before, we don't create soda brands, we don't create jewelry brands. That's so if I were to like shape my company and talk, if I were to try to talk to those audiences, it would fall flat.
Hmm.
Or let me put it the other way: a jewelry designer looking for a, let's just say, web design firm has 1,000 different choices, but they're probably going to want somebody that has positioned themselves in a way that speaks to the jewelry
Hmm.
designer, right? Like, hey, I work with other jewelry designers. I'm really good at doing, we understand what it's like to be a jewelry designer, the sort of pitfalls of running that type of business, and we can help you versus being more just general. And if you're really just general and you're sort of shooting machine gun fire in the air hoping to find clients, that you're just
Hmm.
adding to that noise and just adding to that saturation, right? So i
Yeah.
think i think it's just differentiation.
Hmm.
It's standing out, but standing out to your audience. You can't service every single person on the earth. It just
Right.
doesn't right. And so you really need to, in order for your messaging or your brand to stand out, it's really important to just focus on the specific audiences you're talking to.
Oh, okay. So let's go a bit more in depth in that. So
Sure.
there was a study that came out a few years ago that it seemed as though kids between, like, I don't know, 13 and 17, when asked what they want to do in the future, the number one thing was to be a YouTuber, and that has everything to do with branding, right? So let's, for a second, let's try to think that we're trying to help that demographic, right? What does that mean in the sense of creating a brand? Well, if someone approached your company, right? Hey, I'm trying to start a YouTube brand. What do you do? How do you go about it? And what are the things that you would advise people to that are starting a YouTube channel today in this overly clouded space? How did your company approach it?
So I'll just start by saying we don't brand YouTube channels, but I get that this is a sort of
Yeah.
practice in general, kind of,
Yep.
general advice. So yeah, again, I mean, I think I'll just say the way that when you asked, what to introduce myself, I introduced myself as what my agency does, but then I introduced us as who we serve. And I think that that's the first thing that that's the first piece of advice I would give to anybody starting any kind of new company, whether it's a YouTube channel or you're collecting, I don't know, you're building decks on the back of
Mm,
people's
mm.
houses. It's like you really have to identify an audience, because this is a thing with agencies. There's a lot of talk about you can't be all things to all people, right? I can't
Okay.
go and sell. I can't do SEO, and I can't sell digital marketing, and I can't do PR, and I can't create software,
Mm.
and do websites and do branding really well. And
All
so
right.
if there was someone that was starting a YouTube channel today, I would say, okay, well, one, what are you qualified to talk about, right? Like,
Mm, mm,
what do you want your YouTube channel to be about? What's the content going to be? Who's it for? And like, what are so once you've identified who's it's for, that's your audience. And it's like, what are the things that your audience are interested in? Now, on the B2B side, it's funny. B2B, business to business, is different from business to consumer. Business to consumer is like, again, selling beer or selling t-shirts or whatever, selling clothes. And what you're trying to do there is you're appealing to something that they want in an aspirational way. Like, hey, wouldn't this be
mm,
nice to add to your life? On the business to business side, it's a little different. It's about sort of speaking to their needs, or like the things that keep them up at night, which is like,
mm, mm.
hey, I need XYZ. So, let's just say in the context of a YouTube channel, one audience member might be me, which is
Mhm.
I'm a guy who is often looking up things on YouTube for fixing things around the house, right? Like,
Okay. Yeah.
how do I do this, or how do I do that? And the reason I'm finding those people on YouTube is because that's how they've identified themselves, and that's how
Yeah.
they've identified the audience that they're speaking to, and that's how they frame the content of all of their videos, right? So
Mm.
like, if the guy who teaches me how to fix doorknobs and I don't know, put up vinyl siding suddenly put together a video about his favorite lollipops, like
Mhm. Right.
that's just
Right.
it's not, I'm not interested in that at all. So like, I'm
Yeah.
going to skip that. It's not going to resonate with me at all. But people who are interested in lollipops are never going to find that content either, because this guy is most of the time talking about how to fix your house. And then
Mm,
suddenly
mm,
this like
mm.
one piece of content about lollipops, it's just, no one would ever look to him for that. And YouTube isn't going to surface him in their algorithm, because that's just not what he's known for. So I think
Right.
it's, the short answer would be identifying your audience, identifying what they want or need, and speaking specifically to them about that. And then the fourth piece would be, and this is the tough one, how do you differentiate yourself? Like,
Mm, mm.
how is this guy who gives me home improvement tips different or better
Yeah.
than the other five guys that come up in search?
Yeah. Hmm. That's yeah. It's interesting that you're talking about identifying an audience, a creating content that particularly tailors to that audience and sticking to that.
Yep.
A few months ago, like my YouTube channel is just full of a bunch of random stuff because I was like, well, I haven't identified an audience that I want to serve,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and the downside to that is, well, you make whatever content comes to mind, but YouTube doesn't really know who to show your content
Yeah.
to, right?
Exactly.
And I just made I had made a video about how I got my pilot's license, and all of a sudden that just did really really well, but it brought in all this audience that is interested in aviation. Uh,
Yes.
but then video number two, video number three has nothing to do with aviation. So people are like, I came to you for the aviation stuff, and now you're talking about, well, so
Yeah.
it's quite, it's,
No,
yeah.
you're right. I mean, that would be like the equivalent of me. Like, let's just say on my agency's blog, we did, I love horror movies. I've always loved them.
Mm,
And so it's like, okay, let's just do a North Street's top 10 pick of the best horror movies of all time. Like, that might
yeah.
get, some people might find it and they might find it interesting, but ultimately that's not the audience that is going to buy my services, right? Like, they have no
Mm,
interest in website design, development, branding. They're there because they found my article, and then it's like, okay, well, then what? It's a dead end.
right. Right. Well, okay. So can you speak to companies' social media branding, right? And do you find that some companies still don't value their brand identity online, and that it's more of they have a set customer base, they know how to reach them through conventional means, mail and emails and whatnot, but they just haven't quite found the value of online brand identity, and so they just don't find the value in it. What is, I guess the question that I'm trying to ask is, what do you find it hard in companies to find the value in brand identity online, or do they just not even um, go after online brand identity? I don't know if my question makes any sense.
I think, are you ultimately asking, are companies doing a good job of, are they valuing their online,
Yeah, yeah,
are they valuing social media, and are they doing a
exactly.
good job at it? Okay. Um, I mean, look, for the most part, if your company's not on one or two social media channels, and they should be the right ones, um, you should be getting on. You're behind the ball. Even if you're just like, even if you're just there posting not even regularly, the fact is, like, you should be active. I mean, you should have a presence on at least a couple of social media channels, and that just goes down to straight, like, um, verification that you're real, right? Because
Mm,
if
mm,
you're a company in 2023 and you're invisible online, my first question would be like, are you you're invisible on social media? I would be like, are you
mm.
even real? I mean, it doesn't even look
Right,
like you're
right.
you're real. The second is, I said this before just a second ago, but like the right channels, right? So
Yeah.
for North Street, we're not on Twitter or X. We were never on it. We never cared about it. We're not on Facebook either, but we're on LinkedIn because that's a professional audience and we post there regularly.
Mm,
But we're
okay.
also on we're on something called Dribble, and Behance, I think. These
Mm,
are
mm,
design specific social media platforms, mostly for people who
okay.
are actually designers. So
Mm,
for us, those are two different audiences, right? It's like there's the business audience; those are the people that we want to be our clients, and then on the sort of Behance Dribble side, those are people who we probably want to work for us someday, or
mm,
we would
mm.
want to work with, right? They're designers. So so we're on social media doing that. I think that some companies don't need social media, and in that, they're rare, but like, we work with a lot of financial services firms, and some of those are hedge funds or other type of investment firms that actually like secrecy. They sort of
Mm,
they like mystery and secrecy. So sometimes you'll get to their website and they'll just say, contact us. It's like that
mm. Yeah, yeah.
simple, but they do that on purpose. And so in that case, those companies aren't going to be on social media. But uh, I think the companies have I think the organizations that we work with have, they're doing a good job of being on the platforms, like actually being active. Like I said, they look like they're real companies. I think it's just a question of what they're doing. What they're
Okay.
doing, and again, it goes back to audience, right? Like, so for, like I said before, we're using some social media channels for possible recruiting, like looking for designers and developers who want to work for us, and the other one, we're sort of we're looking for potential clients. So I think that I think that they value social media. I just think that when a lot of times it's still so mysterious to them, and
Mm,
they don't know what to do with it. And so a lot of
yeah.
times what I see happening is, a company, like, let's say a law firm or an accounting firm, they know they should be on social media, but they're not sure what to do. A lot of times they'll hire someone who's really young, like right out of college or even still in college, and they'll be like, "We know nothing about social media, but you're a young person, so you obviously know everything about social media. So just go ahead and run our social media channel." And that's a disaster,
Right.
because
Yeah.
even though that young person they know the platforms, and they know the types of things that will succeed, or will get eyeballs, they oftentimes won't put a strategy behind it. And the strategy really is
Mm,
just like, what do we want to get out of this? Like, what do we want to get
right.
out of our social media channel at the end of the day? And it kind of goes back to that YouTube channel conversation, Moses, which is like, what do we want to get out of our social media channel? We want what? People visiting our website and then applying for a job, or visiting our website and hiring us for our services? Well, then our content should be geared around scratching the itch of the audience that's going to make them want to work with us or work for us.
Okay. Well, can you talk more to that strategy, and specifically for for that young person that has been hired by a company? I mean, your comment doesn't have to be about that particular person that's
Yep,
been
yep, yep,
hired,
yep.
but just young people in general today that, let's assume that they live on social media, right? They're just flipping, scrolling left and right all the time, but they're not extracting the business value out of this application, right? They're not turning it into a business. What is the smallest practical step that maybe you already touched on this a little bit, that a young person can apply to try to make a business out of, well, this is social media platforms, and that can include offering services on Fiverr or something to, I don't know, run a social media channel for a company.
Okay. So are you talking about monetizing their own social media channel, or just kind of making a career out of it, or being the person that, like, being that young person I talked about before who gets hired and then the employer's like, okay, go do social media?
Yeah. Well, I guess all of it, but to narrow it down a little bit, I'm trying to get to the point of young people adopting responsibility, and instead of giving all their time to social media platforms without getting any monetary value out of it, or any value at all, how can they turn this into a source of income? Yeah, that's the question there.
Okay. Well, I'll just say that I personally don't know anything about monetizing a social media channel, right? Like, if I was to become a YouTube person and, like, how to monetize that, I don't know. But what I can speak to is, do you want to get a job in social media? Do you want to become part of a marketing team at a company, and help run their social media channel? In order to do that, I mean, I think you're probably going to have your own pretty solid social media presence yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're going to, like, any company that hires you to do their social media is hopefully going to hire you because they've seen what you're doing online, and they're like, oh, right, this kid or this person seems to know what they're doing. They seem to have a good voice. Let's hire them. My advice, once you get in the door, or even to set up your own social media channels, is to what you asked me about before, which is strategy, right? What's the strategy here? And strategy can be a big word that's used for a lot of different things, but in this context, I just say content strategy. What is the content that you're going to put on your social media channel? So I'll just give you an example. It's not actually a specific company. Or actually, I'll talk about my company. So the things that we post about on social media fall into different. The way that we look at it is this: it's like, okay, who is our audience? What do they need, or what keeps them up at night? And what piece of content or advice or insight are we qualified to give them that will resonate with them? And if it resonates with them, maybe it's like, hey, great, thanks, North Street, thanks for that free advice. Or it's like, hey, thanks, North Street, I'd love to get in touch with you and learn more. So first, we look at the audience, and it's not just one audience, right? Like I said before, sometimes it's potential clients, sometimes it's potential employees that we're trying to get in touch with. So it's identifying the audience, and then it's identifying content story or content arcs or content stories or content types, right? So at our agency, we've got things like, we post our service articles. So how to do this, how to do that. We post culture articles like, hey, here's the new person that started, or here's how we onboard new clients at onboard new employees at North Street. Others might just be like a quote. Like, for example, for this podcast, when we post it, we might pull out a quote from me and just make a social media post out of that. So there's sort of different types, right? There's service article type, there's company culture announcements, there's just quotes. We might just do something that's graphical. We might just do a before and after, right? So there's like these different content types. So I'd identify your audience, your content types, and then the hardest part, which is the production schedule, which is actually taking the time. And you know this, it's like making sure that you set aside the time every day, every week to actually work it, because it's almost worse, rather than having no social media presence. I think it's almost worse to have a social media presence that you can tell they tried to get up and running, and now the last post is from 6 or 8 months ago.
Right. Yeah. So they're a little bit all over the place. Let's make that a bit more concrete. So sure. There's like this brilliant example that they just walked us through. So let's say I have identified an audience. For the sake of it, let's say I'm trying to create a service where I teach people how to start podcasts. And specifically, let's even narrow it down even more and say people that want to start podcasts, like remote podcasts, just like this, right? Where the pain point there is, I want to start a podcast. I want to talk to a lot of people, but I don't want to have to buy all this equipment and send them to people. And
Yeah.
I don't know what does it look like, and I can't fly all over the place, and I don't know a lot of people. So that's the pain point. The solution there is, well, this, right? So I've
Yep.
identified an audience. I've identified how to reach that particular audience, making content like this and chopping it up and trying to reach that audience. What does the rest of the plan look like? The strategy, as you said.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's really asking yourself. I mean, it's asking yourself what people will find interesting for you
Mm-hmm.
to talk about, and what you're qualified to talk about, right? So you got your pilot's license. You actually got your pilot's license?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's awesome. So you're qualified to talk about that, right? But what you
yeah.
wouldn't be qualified to talk about was, okay, like here are the 5 steps to becoming a train engineer, right?
Right,
Because like you,
right.
that makes no sense.
Yeah.
So I would say, the really, this at its simplest, the simplest way to talk about a content strategy, I think, is you, the content creator,
Mm-hmm.
speaking with authority or expertise or insight about things you know about to an audience who wants to know about those things. So, I mean, that
Okay.
example you were walking us through before, that could be, I mean, in a weird way, that how to create an online podcast or a sort of remote podcast could be content for a podcast itself. It's like, all
Right.
right, article or yeah, video number one or podcast number one. Here's the sort of podcasting equipment on a budget kind of list
Mm-hmm.
of things that you need, and we'll go through these things. Then it's like,
Yep.
hey, you're going to need here are the software tools you're going to need. You're going to need this program. You're going to want a scheduling tool to help people schedule. You could actually walk people through the
Yep.
ABCs of like how to get a podcast up and running. If the audience that you're looking to speak to is young people looking to get a podcast up and running.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. That's pretty helpful. It's pretty helpful.
Also, just like, frequency is important, and I'm guilty of
Mm.
probably not following my own advice here.
Yeah.
But I used to think that, okay, I posted something on LinkedIn. I'm not going to bother people anymore with that. The fact is, you post
Mm.
something on LinkedIn, a fraction of your audience sees it. The other the majority doesn't, or even if they see it, they scroll right past it because they're
Right.
thinking about something else. So there's no harm, and actually there's only benefit, I think, from just reinforcing your message. Like, yeah, if you have a piece of like this podcast that we're doing, I could get
Mm-hmm.
one social media post out of it and forget about it, or I could potentially get 3 or 4 out of it, right?
Right.
I could
Right.
I could probably pull out different quotes, different pictures of you and me, different things that we talked about, and I could maybe get 4 pieces of content out of that.
Mm. Repurposing it. Okay. Okay. Well, so let's touch on something that we, I guess, we haven't touched on yet, and that is, depending on your philosophy, failure. Right? What it's just we don't, at least for those of us that live online a lot, we don't really touch on failure that much, or burnout, or things like that. So from someone that has started a business like yourself, can you touch on the, what does failure look like, or like if you're running into an obstacle that you were not anticipating, how does someone overcome that? Yeah, let's just start
Okay.
there.
Yeah, so there's a couple questions there. So I'll just talk about failure first in general.
Okay. Yep.
Failure is just the way you learn, right?
Okay. Yep.
Mistakes are the way you learn. You can read all the books you want, and you can get all the advice from friends that you want, or friends or colleagues. But the fact is, until you've experienced something yourself, made a mistake and then learned from it, uh,
Yep.
it's hard to learn that lesson any other way. And so I think, my agency has grown through mistakes. It's, we, at one point it was just me and one other designer in a room, and believe me, we didn't know the first thing about like running a business, like how to behave on a new business call, how to
Mm-hmm.
follow up with clients, how to pay people, like what to do if something goes wrong during a project, how to handle it,
Right.
so
Right.
how to I don't know, sometimes you might hire the wrong people, how to deal with that
Mm-hmm.
mistake. um
Yeah.
So I think that, and again, I'll also say that there's an important counterpart to this, and I mentioned it before very quickly, but I think everyone should surround themselves with people who are, and it doesn't have to be a big circle, but people who have done or are doing the same thing that they're doing. So what I mean is
Okay.
when I was first starting, I had a friend of mine who had an agency. He had started his agency probably 5 years before mine. It was probably twice my
Okay.
size. And so I got a lot of advice from him. I don't even know if he knew he was giving me advice, right? Like we would just sit down for
Yeah.
lunch and he'd be talking about things. He'd be talking about some situation he was in. And I would just like put that in the back of my mind and be like, oh, I need to remember that. But these lunches were also an opportunity for me to ask him questions. And then our
Yeah.
relationship develops to the point where I could just call this guy anytime. Like, hey,
Mm.
have you run into this before? Like, oh my God, help me. This client's screaming at me. What do I do? So
Yeah.
there's that piece of like mentorship, or just look, every Thursday I actually get together with two other agency owners. Technically we're competitors. Yeah, technically we're competitors, but we're actually really good friends, and we share a lot of failures, right? It's like, oh, what
Okay.
happened this
Yeah.
week? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
client, I did this and like, man, I messed up. Or have you guys
Mm.
ever heard of a client doing XYZ?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. But again, like failure is part of growing up as a person,
Yep.
but it's also part of growing up as a business. It's like, you just have to make these mistakes and lick your wounds and get back up and try to remember never to do it again.
Okay. Well, speaking of the failures slash mistakes you've made in your agency, if someone is trying to start one today, an agency, let's say they want to address not business to business, business to customer, and well, yeah, what would you advise for someone that is trying to start a brand identity agency today, 2024? Well, it's just let's say 2024. What are the things?
Okay.
What are the pitfalls to look forward to? I look forward to, but to avoid. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the idea that you can't just be a brand designer, right? So like if I was to start a new company tomorrow, I used to be the active designer at my company. I'm no longer an active designer, but I used to be the designer, right? That's how I started my
Okay.
business. It was, hey, Tom, can you build us a website, or can you build us a brand? That can only take you so far, right? So I used to kind of think, and I mean, look, this is all theoretical because I'm not shutting down my business and starting a new one tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I haven't actually tried this, but I think that a lot of folks, when they start their business, are focused on the work. But the work, honestly, the work is table stakes. And what I mean by that is, if you hire a design agency or a branding agency for a certain price, you should expect a certain quality of work, meaning the designs are gonna be good, right? So so then what separates one good design agency from another design agency? It's not necessarily the work. The work is what gets people in the door and gets people excited, and it's like, oh yeah, you can do this. But ultimately, the work I don't think is the most important part of the business. I honestly think it's, like I said before, I think it's operations. I think it's making sure that your company runs well. And so if you're just a single person starting a branding agency, what does that mean? It just means, okay, let me write down the process for how I create a logo. Let me write that down. Let me get it in front of the client so the client understands what they're getting. Let's get that language into a contract so that the contract is exactly what I told the client they would get and exactly what the client's expecting to get. But then also, because I've defined that process, I can put that on a calendar and I can say, okay, first meeting's going to be here, second meeting's going to be here, last meeting's going to be here. Just having processes is like operations at its most basic, right? It's just like, okay, this is how we do things. This is the checklist of steps that we follow when we do something. Because I said it before, clients, you can't be unpredictable to work with. Clients don't want unpredictability. They want to feel safe that you're going to take care of them. And then at the end of the day, yeah, they're going to get great work, but it was not a nightmare to get there. So again, if the question is, you're going to start out a branding agency tomorrow, my quick advice is, okay, obviously have an online portfolio with your work on it.
Yeah.
Figure out who you're doing work for. You can't be a branding agency that does all things for all people, because you'll never get someone in the crowd being like, oh yeah, that's me, I need that, because your messaging is too generic. And then I would really put processes around how we get new work and then how we do the work.
Okay. That's pretty solid. Thanks for that advice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw you a curveball here. It has nothing to do with the topic at hand. But question 1, what is your current favorite song? And question 2, as far as you can remember, what is your earliest favorite song?
Okay, I can tell you in a second what my earliest favorite song is.
Oh, okay.
So it's a song called "Ever Since You've Been Leaving Me" by a guy named Julian Lennon, who is the son of John Lennon. Okay. So like in the 80s, he's a one-hit wonder. I mean, he had one song, but I just remember I was a little kid when it was popular. And I'm almost 45. I know I am 45. So we're talking about like, this is like the 80s, right? So I was a little kid, and I remember that was my favorite song. And I remember I would hear it on my parents' radio, and then I would run into my living room and put on MTV, because I thought that they were the same. Like I thought that I would be able to like run into the TV room, turn on MTV, and like see the video.
Yeah.
Didn't work that way, but so that's my current. I mean, that's my
earliest,
my original. Man, I'm a big music fan, so that's a really, really hard question for me to name my favorite song. I'd say, man,
out of the top
right
5,
now,
pick one.
Okay, I will go with. Actually, I'll say I like the song "Back from Somewhere" by a band called Husker Du. So Husker Du is a 1980s punk band from Minnesota, and one of my favorites. And I like them because they had two lead singers. I was actually just talking to a friend about this the other day. All the bands that have more than one lead singer, which is fun. And so Husker Du is one of those bands.
Okay, wow, Tom, I just want to say thank you so much for stopping in. I'm trying to be respectful of the time here. It's been almost an hour. That's crazy. But are there any final thoughts that you want to leave the audience with, and if they want to follow your agency or see what you're up to, where can they go?
Check. So awesome. Our website is northstreetcreative.com. Our social handles, like I mentioned, LinkedIn and Behance and Dribble, are down at the bottom. And I just say, I think I really liked when we were talking about mistakes and failure and learning from them, and just I just say to anybody, like that's what makes the world go round. Like there's no one on this planet who is perfect and has it all figured out. Like even if you're going in for a job interview and you're scared and you're nervous, like the person that is interviewing you is just a person who has made 100 mistakes in their lifetime as well. So no shame in making a mistake and learning from it and doing better the next time.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying fail often, but learn from them, the mistakes.
100%.
Tom Conlon, thank you so much for coming to the Moses Kabandana Podcast.
Good seeing you, man.